Cool. So, how are you? Where are you now, right now?
I am in Florianopolis.
Uh-huh. Where were you? When did you arrive? You just got there, like what, this
I
week?
got there literally when you called me. I arrived in Florianopolis 2 days ago when I got a phone call from you. I couldn't answer because I was getting off the bus, and then I had a bit of a transition. So I couldn't talk to you on that day because I was arriving. So I'm really
No
new here.
worries. All right, great. Where were you in New York before that?
Yeah, I was in New York for 3 weeks, almost. I
Uh-huh.
arrived June 30th. Then I left. I left for Brazil July 18th.
Huh,
Almost
so
3 weeks.
so I guess you've been traveling around a lot the last few years.
Way too much. It's exhausting. I'm so tired of
Wow, wow. How long have you
it.
been traveling like this much for?
God, well, let's see. 2019, I left the USA, went to Mexico, lived there for 9 months. I came out after 6 months, came back. Then after Mexico, at the end of 2019, I came back to New York to see my parents for a few weeks. Early January, I went to Spain right before the pandemic. Then I spent a year and a half in Spain, went to Brazil for 6 months. Then after that, I went to Serbia for 3 months, Montenegro, 2.5 months, and now back to New York, and now I'm back to Brazil. So I come full circle. So the short answer is it's been about 3 years. Beginning of 2019 is when I started being a digital nomad. How about you? You've been doing this a while too, right?
Yeah, I started in like 2016. So for 6 years
But
now.
you only been in Costa Rica, right? You haven't been all over the map like I was.
I have gone to a lot of places for surf photography. So all the tropical places. Like I went to
Ah,
Hawaii, Australia, Asia,
Charles. Asia.
Mexico. Yeah.
Oh, where in Mexico have you been?
Um, Mazatlan, do you know Mazatlan?
Oh yeah, Sinaloa. Yeah, right. I've been in Puerto Vallarta. Mazatlan is just like 7 hours north.
Yeah, exactly.
Pacific coast.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, wow. Well, hey, anyways, so I guess you ended up back in Brazil. I guess you like Brazil, huh?
Yeah, this is a wonderful place to be. Florianopolis. It's much safer than all of Brazil. It has everything you could possibly imagine. Really, I
Nice.
mean, you name it.
Well, hey, I guess if you're able to run the business, if you're able to run the business from all these places,
Yeah,
you have been running academic composition while you've been traveling this whole time, right?
the whole time I've been doing this since 2009, 13 years.
Oh, wow. Wow. Was it uh was it a difficult transition to go from, well, I suppose before 2019, what were you doing then? Like, were you working in an office or something, or?
No. I actually lived in Washington D.C. for 10 years. After I graduated from the university in 2009, I moved from Michigan to Washington. Lived in the nation's capital for a decade. That's where I met a lot of my most regular clients. A lot of our best and most loyal clients come from DC. It's still a fact, actually. It's still the way. It's still that way. In fact, I would say that the overwhelming majority of our clients are from DC now. The highest paying, the most regular, and the most committed customers work for the government.
Huh.
Typically, they're former military, they're retired, some retire from the military, they have families, they have careers. I presume they get help from the government. Usually, the federal employer pays their tuition. And yeah, DC clients have certainly been with us the longest, and it's been a great match.
Hmm. Well, I guess that would make sense just because if you're a veteran, you get GI Bill benefits, which gives you free access to schooling, right? College.
Oh yeah. I remember I lived in Dumfries, Virginia for like 5 years. It's right by Quantico. I've had clients who were stationed there who went to work in Quantico, and sometimes they drop off books at my apartment because it was so close, so convenient. Then I also lived in Stafford. That's a town with military influence. Definitely, there has been quite a lasting and a fruitful alliance between the U.S. military and academic composition.
Huh.
I
Very
expect it will continue that way. Unfortunately, I'm no longer in D.C. I cannot have as close of a relationship with our military clients as I used to, but they keep in touch, and we still connect with them quite a bit.
Nice. Okay. Very good. Very good. So, when you moved the business from, I suppose, one location to when you started traveling, did did operations change a lot? Did the business change a lot? How did you kind of?
Not really, no. I never had to register the business with any foreign government. I still pay taxes in the U.S. So that means that essentially nothing changed in an official capacity. The only challenge I face is that the time zone has changed, meaning that sometimes they have to work until 4 or 5 in the morning to accommodate customers who live in the USA. In fact, all of them do. For example, when I lived in Spain, it took 6 hours ahead of them. And that meant that in order to keep up with customers who want to communicate at 11 in the evening, I had to be up until 5 a.m. That was stressful and inconvenient, but it's not a big deal. Completely manageable.
It's interesting. All right. Yeah. I guess Europe. I guess Europe is just inconvenient. It's like a 6 hours. It's like a half day, I guess, huh?
Hour difference. That's the advantage of being in Latin America. You're more or less in the same time zone as the USA and Canada.
That makes sense. So, okay, so how was it that what gave you the idea to start academic composition? Like, were there a lot were you in university? Did you have a lot of friends who were just complaining about the workload, or how did you see the need? How did you open the business initially?
Well, my first experience of this nature was back in 2005, I believe. Yeah, I believe it must have been the end of 2005, the beginning of 2006, where I had a bit of a shaky situation with my parents. I was the typical millennial who could live with his parents. So I moved out when I was 19 years old. A good friend of mine let me live in his suite mate's room. So one of his suite mates moved out, and he let me live there for free. But I didn't have any money, so what did I do? I began helping pretty much everybody with their writing assignments, including him. In fact, I received my first payment from my friend back when I was 19 with a case of beer. And other people brought food for me. Others, they didn't have much cash, but they let me pass into the dorm. They looked after me. All I had to do was just help them with the tedious academic writing tasks. So that worked really well. Now, I remember it continued throughout these years when I was in the university. An old friend of mine who studied philosophy with me pursued a master's program in philosophy, and obviously he was not prepared for that. He was doing it for the status, for the image. Frankly, I thought he wanted to appear smart, and I helped him. In fact, I recall my senior year in college, I wrote, at least a dozen papers for him. I'm pretty sure I did 2 semesters worth of work for him my senior year in college while he was pursuing his master's degree, and that gave me an idea. What if there was a demand for what I was doing? What if I had a chance to make my services available to a broader audience? And that's what I ended up doing. I went on Craigslist, I posted a whole bunch of ads, and it so happened that within 2 months or so, I had more work than I could ever keep up with. And ever since that day in 2009, the demand has always been there. I've never struggled.
Wow. I guess it was destiny then.
Destiny. All right. Life is what you make it. Life is what you make it. I don't believe in destiny. In fact, neither do most of our clients. And after all, how much is their time, their family's worth? how much is their life worth. And they're taking control of their lives, they're taking destiny into their own hands by collaborating with us. And I fully support them in that decision.
Nice. Have you any memorable stories of some of clients that we've helped that have gone on to do great things?
Yeah, quite a few. I remember that we had quite a few customers from the University of Illinois. Several of them were from foreign countries, especially Kuwait. I recall there was a fellow from Kuwait who was pursuing a PhD in political science. I personally wrote most of his assignments, and we've gone on to collaborate for nearly a decade. As far as I know, he now works for the UN, and some may criticize him as having cut corners, as perhaps even a dishonest man, but I don't see it that way. I believe that he got where he is, not because of his academic credentials, but because of his abilities, interpersonal skills, practical intelligence, and the sincerity of his character. The fact that he may not be the most accomplished student is hardly relevant. There are so many more important things in life. And in my experience, there is rather a minimal and a tenuous connection between somebody's academic performance and their capacity to perform well at their actual job. There is a complete disconnect. For instance, at the UN, he doesn't need to write a 10-page thesis on what have you on the Armenian genocide. That's not part of his job. Nor does he need to write a dissertation on what have you, why Arab international students struggle in the USA and whatnot. He can certainly get ahead in life and be entirely competent with the skills that he had prior to having entered the university, as there was really not much of a connection there at all.
I see. So academic performance does not correlate with success in life necessarily, or job performance.
Not necessarily, but I would be careful there. I would qualify that statement. In certain cases, it certainly does. For example, if you're pursuing a highly rigorous field, such as, say, computer science, physics, maybe even accounting, and in these cases, there are practical skills to be learned at the university. For instance, we don't have very many clients for doctors. There's certainly a connection between academic performance and practical life skills. When you have a clearly defined academic discipline with applications to the real world, in that case, yeah, I would say it certainly matters. And we can't really help these people. However, if they're pursuing a rather soft discipline, say, political science may be seen as soft, perhaps there is a politically motivated discipline on gender studies. These things people can learn on their own, and whatever they learn at the university in this regard probably will not be very applicable to the real world. So these people are not missing out on much. If they don't feel the need to do their own work, I can't blame them. I think that they have better things to do, and they will be just as competent at their jobs as they would have been had they done these assignments on their own.
I see. So it would not be a good idea for a doctor to hire academic composition to write their papers, right? For example. So
well, in most cases, no.
Mm-hmm. So what would be like the perfect, I guess, customer? Like what kind of person could most benefit from our services? And are there some cases where you refused to accept certain clients, or to, because you understand what I'm saying? Like if there was a certain case where you were like, unfortunately, we cannot help you on this assignment, or has that ever happened?
Well, I had some ethical reservations about some customers. For example, in one case, there was a student of nursing who clearly and absolutely had no business being in the university. He couldn't explain to me why he wanted to apply for this program. He couldn't tell me what his passion was. He wanted us to write a letter of admission, but literally gave absolutely nothing to work with. And never mind the challenge of fabricating the entire statement from scratch, the more salient preoccupation here is whether this person will be able to land a job that's important to society and will truly have no business being there. Of course, we have lots of nursing students as well. And sometimes they have assignments that are not particularly technical, that seem like busy work, that are not applicable to their field. For example, we might write a 10-page paper on some rare tropical disease. We might write a discussion post on how to interact with a person from a different culture, and that sounds more like common sense. If a nursing student has a cliche academic assignment or a basic discussion post that's not at all technical, of course, will help them. But if it seems to be the case that they have a rather technical task, practical assignment that they really need to be informed about, then we would probably advise them to at least try to do the work on their own. But of course, we can tutor them, we can counsel them, we can edit them. But there are rare cases when we have ethical reservations. And these are cases when the client is given us an assignment that's clearly applicable to their professional discipline.
I see. All right.
And you were also asking me about the kind of a client who can benefit the most from our services. Well, I would say perhaps the members of the military can reap the highest benefits. Many of them are active duty personnel. They're deployed. And in order to continue climbing the ladder in the government or in a corporate setting, they need to continue to receive additional credentials that are not necessary. They are oppressed, I would say, by this plight of progressive credentialism. This year they need a master's degree, then they need another master's degree, then they need a PhD, and all of this is just to keep their jobs sometimes, and they need to keep on getting all these additional credentials in order to do the work that was possible for them to do before all this. 20, 30 years ago, many of these jobs in the DC area that require a master's degree were entirely accessible to people with just a high school diploma. Well, I would say that anybody who is in that situation where they clearly see that their assignments were little more than busy work with an extremely limited connection to their discipline, they can certainly benefit from that. And in fact, I'll tell you that in the Washington, D.C. area, there is the highest concentration of master's degrees per 10,000 people. There's the highest concentration of that in the USA. And I think the reason for this is that a lot of government contractors are often pressured to keep up with progressive credentialism. And in many cases, much of the academic work that they're required to do is not at all relevant to their expertise. And then these are the people who could certainly reap the highest benefits from our services. And it's not a coincidence that these are our best clients. They're grateful for us, and we appreciate their support and loyalty.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I never thought about the government contracts being the reason why so many people got masters, but I guess it makes sense. Yeah, free schooling, government contracts.
Well, I would say that there is a fundamental difference between the private and the public sector in this sense. In the private sector, employers are under immense pressure to maximize profits. And they will often have to settle for the most qualified candidate rather than the best well-educated. For example, my computer programming firms often hire specialists who graduated from a boot camp, which took them 3 to 6 months. They will hire an autodidact, a self-taught programmer. They don't really care what university you attended. What they do care about is whether you can be competent. And there are many ways to skin a cat. You know, how Deng Xiaoping of China famously said, it doesn't matter what color the cat is, as long as it catches mice. And that, and in that sense, he justified the Communist Party's transition from a command economy to a free market economy. And many companies in a highly competitive market, have to have this pragmatic approach. Formal education is just that, a formality. However, in the public sector, things are different. Decorum is an essential part of politics. Politics is about appearance. And to keep up these appearances, government institutions often choose to hire candidates whose resume appears to be the most embellished, the most attractive. Whether they hire candidates who look great on paper, rather than those who can pass the sniff test, those who are actually worth their salt. And when our clients are under pressure to pursue tasks that have absolutely nothing to do with their expertise, and they know that this helps them neither personally nor professionally, well then, they have an obvious solution in mind, and that's us. And that's where we come in.
I see. That point versus with private, like business sector versus political sector, I never thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like completely different pathways. It's like competence versus resume, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And the university is essentially about embellishing resumes. I imagine you may be familiar with a wonderful book by Brian Kaplan called The Case Against Education. Brian Kaplan teaches at George Mason University. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this professor of economics happens to live in New York in the DC area. I believe this is how he developed his perspective. He argued that formal education is about signaling. It's about accentuating your position. Essentially, it is a marketing scheme for yourself to keep up with more and more degrees in order to appear attractive to employers who value style over substance. In Washington, D.C. is a great place to do all of that. So the metaphor that Kaplan used that I still can't forget is that getting a university degree is like standing up in a crowded movie theater when everybody else is standing up. So imagine if you live in DC, you have no choice, and you see that a lot of your colleagues who are not quite as bright or as dedicated as you are getting degree after degree after degree. What are you going to do? Are you also going to stand up and posture? You may have to do that in order to see the movie. Or you can remain seated and assert that you're just as smart as they are. Well, guess what? You're going to get passed up for candidates who are possibly less competent, but more visible, more immediately attractive to employers.
Right. Okay, so
are you familiar with that book?
What was the name of the book again?
Education. The Case Against Education by Brian Kaplan.
I have heard of the book. I have not read it, but I have heard of it. Yes. But
so I would say Brian Kaplan is right on the money, literally. And so are most of our clients, most of our best clients. They're on the money because they keep on taking out federal loans, student loans, in order to finance their fight against progressive credentialism. And once that happens, guess what's next? The universities will raise tuition because students are not paying out of pocket. Of course, they're going to have to pay, and why wouldn't they? They have no choice. And there we are. The voucher system of education is one reason why the costs of university education are astronomical in the USA. And I don't see this changing. My only concern is that some of our clients may not be getting a free ride. I believe that many of our best clients have loans that finance their education completely, but some do not. So the costs of progressive credentialism are rather quite extreme.
Right.
And I think that while we can't stop it, we can't stop tuition rates from going up. The least we can do is make the process a little bit more palatable, perhaps slightly less painful for the people who are the most afflicted by it, and that's our customers in the DC area who are under constant and unyielding pressure to keep up with more and more seemingly useless credentials.
Have you are so one could see the issue of there being, if you constantly have to get more credentials and then you constantly have to get more loans and then the cost of tuition is increasing, you're sort of climbing it's like a Sisyphean task, like you're rolling up this stone up a hill, right? Is are our clients, how are you seeing it? Like, are most people getting ahead of the rock? You know, they're getting it to the other side, or are they just, is it like, how are you seeing the situation, I suppose?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of our clients are struggling in this sense, and there's quite a gap. And they keep on asking me questions like, oh, should I get a master's degree? Should I get a PhD? Should I keep on doing this? And I respectfully have to tell them, no, I would not recommend that you go to graduate school unless you're pursuing a highly rigorous field in a systematic manner. So if you are in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, if you have a clear plan for that and you know how exactly that degree will benefit you, I'd say by all means. But if somebody asks me, oh, I have a master's degree in social work, should I go for a PhD? I'd say no. First of all, your mental health will probably deteriorate. 50% of graduate students are depressed. In fact, there was a wonderful blog called 100 Reasons Not to Go to Graduate School in the Humanities. I would recommend that to all of our clients. And I would say that if your career is in crisis, don't get on a treadmill. Take a step back, breathe, find a way to learn practical skills, and if possible, get out of the DC area. You don't need to be part of this military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower famously said. There is life outside that bubble. So if you can just stop getting these credentials, by all means, please do. Now, I realize this sounds like a strategy of self-elimination. Of course, I want our regular clients to come back. We depend on them a lot. Yeah, I have to be completely honest. The university is an institution that does not have their best interests at heart. Not at all. And what I recommend for most of our clients is that once they have their bachelor's degree and they can find a way to use it, by all means, they should go out to the real world and cultivate actual meaningful and marketable skills. Sometimes they would need to get a master's degree. It may be a necessary evil in some places, and we're happy to help them with this. Yeah, if they need to get 2 master's degree and they need a PhD, at that point it just becomes too much. Though, on the other hand, we have quite a few customers who are in their 50s, who already have an established career, and their employer and the federal government pays their tuition. They have a wonderful salary of over $200,000 a year. These people don't have much to lose, as the employer foots the bill. So in their case, I'm happy for them, but unfortunately, I find that the university seems to lure a lot of our clients into a rather difficult position where they feel pressure to continuously get advanced degrees with limited practical applications. So to answer your question, I would say 2/3 of the time, graduate school is not going to be helpful for many of our clients, but there are cases where people do benefit from this. Though fortunately, the majority of our customers are either undergraduate students or they're just getting their first master's degree. So I do believe that certainly these credentials may be helpful for them, at least until they commit to a PhD program. And at that point, it becomes clearly counterproductive.
I see. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like not everybody should do it, but then the few people that should do it. I mean, it can be such a struggle that having an extra help is just logical. It's like you wouldn't hesitate to hire a tutor or something. It makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, uh, hiring a tutor is one thing, but hiring an academic writer is another. You see, when you hire a tutor, you are presumably guided by the conviction that you're learning something interesting and important. And I would recommend that for many of our clients who pursue a STEM field, and we do have great tutors available. Though in cases of people who are merely preoccupied with a mountain of busy work, in their case, academic writing, hiring an academic writer is a fine choice, and they're not missing out on much. And once they get to the bare minimum that's required to satisfy the strand of progressive credentialism, they're free to go on to pursue bigger and better things. Yeah, it's an entirely respectable choice.
Okay, quick question actually. Just because you mentioned DC was like a city where the environment makes people continue to get schooling, right? That makes sense. The military industrial complex. Would you consider like New York City, for example, or say Miami? Would it be
Well, New York, the
sort
dynamic
of
in New York City is different. In New York
sort of on the
City, New
higher?
York has also connected us for a lot of our clients. Yet one fundamental difference between New York and DC is that New York is home to a myriad of private enterprises, like say Goldman Sachs would operate there. Google has an office there. Bank of America, any Fortune 500 company that you can think of is probably has an office in New York. And these companies often pressure students to get degrees. Yet there they have to be focused on competence, core capabilities. Of course, they would rather have a candidate who's formally well educated, but that's not the most important thing. In DC, that's different. In DC, in many cases, style does matter more than substance.
I
But
see.
in a true free market, that's just not the case.
That's a really interesting point, actually. Like New York is leaning towards the more private side because I guess for somebody looking for a job, like some of the people that you said that were just stuck in the DC mentality, like moving, like changing jobs is more than simply just maybe what job you're doing. Is sort of what company you're working for and what city you're working for. So I guess to those people that's got stuck in DC, maybe looking for a job outside of your current environment, maybe in another city could be an option. That just kind of,
Absolutely. Well, I would say that
I
I
guess that
hear
goes
this a
back to why
lot.
you're traveling a lot.
Well, I would say that I've heard the story quite a bit. The most common I heard from customers in the DC area is something like, "Oh, I make $200,000 a year. I hate my job. My coworkers are toxic. The bureaucracy is absolutely mind-numbing and daunting." And I respectfully ask, "Well, why don't you switch?" And what's the answer? Why don't you switch places? Why don't you find another employer? The answer is that, "Oh, I do almost nothing at my job. So I don't feel like moving." You see, what I'm trying to convince many of them is that, I'm sorry?
No, I said, interesting.
So what I'm trying to convince many of them is that, look, if you move to say New York or another city, or if you go remote and you find that work that is more challenging, more interesting, you might have to take a pay cut at first, but I think you'll rediscover the better version of yourself, and eventually the money will follow. So there's really nothing worse, in my view, than being stuck in the matrix in DC, where you're constantly under enormous pressure to keep up with credential after credential after credential, and there is no end in sight. And I would say the biggest problem with this is that there is low decision latitude. There are a lot of our clients who make $200,000 a year working at a bureaucracy feel like they have very little control over what they do on a daily basis. There are just too many government regulations to keep up with, too many arbitrary rules. Yes, they're happy that they have work day after day, year after year, but the lack of autonomy is certainly a discouraging factor. It wears on them, and it depletes them of the will to seek the best version of themselves. And so I would agree with you that perhaps moving from a public sector to the private sector would be a great decision for many of our clients. That's one way to beat progressive credentialism.
Mm-hmm. All right, all right. I guess nothing's easy, but I guess it's an option for some people. If they just need it. Sometimes I guess people just need a change. I know that happened. That happened for me at one point. I was like,
well, it happened for me quite a bit. I've been all over the world because of what I do. I can take my laptop, my iPhones anywhere I go, and I believe that this lifestyle stands in sharp contrast with that of the people who are caught up in the matrix. Now, I certainly understand there are reasons for this. Many of them have families, they have children to provide for, they're getting older, they're not 25 anymore. When you're 55 and you've had 30 years in the military, and now you have a way to retire peacefully by working at a bureaucracy. Well, I think that maybe sticking around isn't so bad for you. Yeah, in cases where say our client is in their 30s, early to mid 30s, and they feel worn out by this fight against progressive credentialism, to them I can certainly recommend looking around, looking both ways to see what other opportunities are available. There is life outside of the military-industrial complex.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I think we're almost at 20 minutes, so I think we're good for this interview, but we got to talk about what you mean by the matrix the next time. You got to go more into that. I'm curious about that.
Do you want me to expound upon that now, or do we leave it for another day?
If you can do it in 2 minutes.
Okay, well, regarding the Matrix, I would say that most of us have seen the Matrix trilogy. And one of the most provocative and distinctive characters in the Matrix is Agent Smith, a rogue agent who imposes conformity upon all other characters. He literally sticks his hand into other characters in the simulation, and they become like him. He clones himself. Well, he is misanthropic. He subjugates all life to his will. He essentially turns them into machines. And deprives them of their capacity to make autonomous decisions. I find that a lot of our clients can relate to this in the sense that the government is the machine that subjugates them to its arbitrary dictates, arbitrary mandates that force them to get degree after degree endlessly, and they feel trapped. Now, the way to escape the matrix is to take the red pill, to prioritize freedom over security. See, the government offers security, and in order to escape this conundrum, it's necessary to forfeit that. It's necessary to open yourself up to risks and to recover your capacity for autonomous decisions, which in turn will empower you to take control of your life on a much higher level than the Matrix will allow.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Yes, very good. On that note, I think we're good. I think that's it. Nice talking to you, Aleksey.